All right. So, as you recall, can you guys see that okay in the back? Do I need to put the blinds down? It's like legible. Okay. So, this unit is about the growth of microbes and then how we control the growth of microbes. We've split the control into chapter 8, which is like control of microbes in the environment, not in a patient. Maybe on a patient, but not in a patient. And that's chapter 9. So the big overview that we've been working through, right, is this giant chart. There are 4 main ways that you can control the growth of microbes. You can use physical agents, and we talked about heat as well as radiation together last time, right? Then you may use chemical agents, and we talked a little bit about how this works. We're going to talk about gases, and I told you guys to kind of take a look at liquids, especially like looking at antiseptics versus disinfectants on your own. We said that you're going to watch a video to talk about mechanical removal methods, and then we are going to talk about biological agents today. Does that make sense? All right. So, oh, goody. Okay. One sec. Let me get caught up. Boop, boo. Yes. Okay. Let's see. So I've got, okay, Amber and Khadija and wait, Zahra. Shaja. Okay. Working on it. I'll get there. Okay. Khadija. Okay. All right. So we talked about the idea, right, of the ideal disinfectant. Similar, honestly, this would be similar to what we would talk about for the ideal antiseptic. You want something that is effective against a wide variety because you don't necessarily know, right? I don't know which microbes are likely to be on a surface. You might have a better guess in a clinical setting. But you don't always know. You don't want it to leave a damaging residue, right? Because we know that the inanimate objects that we apply disinfectants to often later come in contact. And you want it to work at a low concentration. That helps with it not being damaging, but it also reduces the cost. You want it to be stable so that you can stick it in a closet and like use it for a long time. Not stinky because people complain, right, about that. And you want it to work in both water-based solutes and in lipids. Okay. And the idea, these same things could apply to an antiseptic, right? Because especially here, you're with an antiseptic. What's the difference between an antiseptic and a disinfectant? Inanimate object, right? So if you're treating a wound, if you're going to like have a cut, then you're going to use an antiseptic. So you definitely don't want it to damage the tissue. So all of these things essentially could come into play, whether you're talking about a disinfectant or an antiseptic. And we really looked at a bunch of these. So these are some of the chemical control agents. Some of them are disinfectants. Some of them are antiseptics. Some of them can be both, depending on the concentration. So you're going to look online and learn about the phenolics, the alcohols, halogenated compounds, aldehydes, quaternary ammonium compounds, and then gases, especially ethylene oxide. Sure. I think it's up there, right? up there, then we'll do it. Let me check. Yes. Yep. All right. So, and again, we will come back to chemotherapeutic agents in chapter 9. So that's just a preview. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, the goal with any of these agents, whether we are, right, the goal is to reduce the number of microbes such that we won't have a greater probability of infection, right? So I want you to be able to we're going to go through and talk about the effects that these different conditions can have on the efficacy, how effective, how well these chemical or physical agents will work to reduce the number of microbes. We'll talk about the role of microbial population size, how many microbes there are, about the composition, how many types of microbes there are, the role of temperature, time, and local environmental conditions. And then we're going to talk about how do we actually measure killing rates and how we actually figure out, is this an effective way to reduce the number of microbes that are present? And that's important because we want to know, right? If I use this disinfecting agent on this counter so that I'm going to reduce the risk of, say, influenza A, I want to know, am I using it in an appropriate way, and is it going to work against this particular agent? Okay. So the evaluation of antimicrobial agents is actually fairly complicated, in the sense that there are multiple agencies that can be involved. Typically, if you are talking about disinfectants, right? Because then we're talking about, right, cleaning floors, cleaning counters, doorknobs. But also if you're talking about reducing the number of microbes in the water, that's all the environmental protection agencies. But if you're talking about inside a patient or on a patient, or if you're talking about, let's say you're working with food, right, in a food preparation area, right? So maybe you're concerned, we're going to see an example of like, how do you clean a cutting board after you cut up chicken? That then is the Food and Drug Administration. And sometimes, actually, it can be the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, because if you're dealing with a facility that is slaughtering animals, so you're dealing with like a slaughterhouse for beef or chicken, or even collecting vegetables directly from the field, those mechanisms are actually prescribed by the USDA. So it's complicated. It's not ideal, but that's okay. It's what we have. All right, so let's talk a little bit then about the conditions that influence the effectiveness of antimicrobial agent activity. And I'm going to point out that this sounds complicated, but the good news is it's very logical. You already know lots of this. You just have never thought about it this way. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is population size. So which do you think is going to be easier to get rid of? A large population of microbes or a small population of microbes? Small, see? You got this. Exactly. So large populations are harder to remove. And that just makes sense, right? Because there's more of them there. Let's talk about population composition. So if you have one type of microbe versus that's the same, maybe you have 10,000 of one type of microbe, or if you have 10,000 of 10 different types of microbes, still a total of 10,000, which is going to be harder to remove? Yeah, the one that's got greater complexity, because there's more possibilities where maybe you have an endospore, right, forming strain. Maybe they can communicate together. We saw what can happen in biofilms, right? So typically, more diverse groups of microbes are harder to remove. Okay. Here's number 3. What do the square brackets mean again? Who remembers? Yep. So here we're talking about concentration of our agent, the thing we're using. What do you think? Do you think what's going to be more effective typically? A high concentration of agent or a low concentration? High, exactly. So typically, higher concentrations of agents are typically more effective. It works better to reduce the number of microbes that again, you know this, you've just not thought about it. Okay. Let's see. Number 4, switch colors. Just like red. Number 4, what does the hourglass represent? Time. Guess what? Which is going to be more effective? More time or less time? More, exactly. The longer you can leave something typically is more effective. So more time is typically more effective. Why don't we always just leave disinfectant around forever? Yeah, I mean, then it'd be like slippery. There's reasons we can't leave things forever. Okay, what about temperature? This one is a little bit tricky because it somewhat depends. Typically, what is going to help with your agent's effectiveness to a point? What do you think? High temperature or a low temperature? I heard someone say high. Why do you think it's high? You said so typically what happens as the temperature goes up when you think about chemistry? What happens to the molecules? They move faster, and that's going to increase typically the agent's ability to interact with the microbes, especially if it's a chemical agent. But even if it's not, typically the temperature then is going to get the microbes maybe moving faster, which is also going to be helpful. So typically, high temp is more effective for killing microbes, and if it gets too hot, maybe it just kills microbes directly. The one caveat is if, let's say you're using something like an alcohol, where maybe the alcohol would evaporate, that could have an impact potentially as well. Okay. And then the final thing to talk about is the local environment. Typically, the idea is, and again, this makes sense, what do you typically do before you try to disinfect something? Do you usually just go straight for disinfectant, or should you try to clean it first? You want to clean it first because all that, if there's dirt, if there's debris, if there's oils, those more, anytime that the environment is more complicated, then it's going to potentially interfere with your antimicrobial agent. So anything that is going to make the local environment kind of more diverse is also potentially going to increase the risk of a biofilm and decrease the efficacy of your antimicrobial agent. But you know this already, that's why you typically clean and then disinfect or sanitize, right? Remember what's going on in your dishwasher. It cleans first, and then it sanitizes for that reason. Make sense? Okay. So the local environment, more complex, similar to what we see with the microbes, reduces efficacy. Okay. Does this kind of make sense? So, but these are things that you potentially want to think about if you're thinking about how you want to treat if you're trying to remove the microbes from an object, you may want to think about how many microbes are there? Is this a complex environment? That may impact your thinking.